Hi, good day, it's Michael McNeil here. I want to talk a little bit about Scepticism today. I was just looking through the various titles, as my intention is to go through the chapters of my book and try and pick out some of the themes. Now I've done a little bit of a general introduction, but then I was looking at all the different things I put in the introductory chapter, and I was thinking, man, there's loads here. So I think what I'm going to try and do is pick some smaller bits out, and so in a sense the videos will be shorter, which for some people will be great because it means I don't necessarily have to clip them and put them into shorts and stuff, because apparently you've got 10 seconds to try and persuade somebody to carry on watching the video, and then people might not watch more than 5 or 7 minutes of it because they're so busy, which is a little bit of a catastrophic statement on the state of our culture, but that's another philosophical issue which hopefully we can talk about when we talk about cultural philosophy at some point. But I wanted to talk specifically here just to one of the themes in the introduction, which I think is great. This is one of those subjects that I'm not saying this is a problem of philosophy, but this is just part of the process of philosophy. It's like when you start talking about something, it's very, 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 very easy to quickly, typically because of the history of 20th century philosophy, which became more and more analytical in its character, and so people sort of chopped up every subject into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller slices of analysis. And so people disappear down tiny little rabbit holes talking about the roots of reference or something, and then they'll subdivide up the roots of reference into something else, and then they'll chop up that little bit, and you end up with tiny little fragments. We mentioned in a previous video how there's two important functions within philosophy. There's the analytic function, and then there's a synthetic function. And the synthetic function is trying to take all those ideas or all those things that you've discovered through your analysis, and then you're trying to synthesize them together to in a sense to solve a philosophical problem. Now that in itself is a philosophy statement of what you believe the purposes of philosophy for. And if you do even like a trivial sort of search for, you'll find lots of books, especially in the continental tradition, which are trying to say what's the purpose of philosophy, what's the point of philosophy, why do you do philosophy? And there's as many answers to, I think it was A.J. Ayer, one of the famous British philosophers. I think he was very famous because he wrote the book Language, Truth and Logic, which I think was 1934, 1935, which brought logical positivism to the English language, which of course meant that it then went throughout the whole Anglo-American sphere, and it was one of the most influential philosophy books of the era. And he sort of like said, one of the characteristics of philosophers is they don't just disagree about what the questions of philosophy should be. They actually disagree about how you should answer those problems of philosophy once you've somehow decided on what the questions of philosophy should be. And so I'm presenting a particular view, and but I'm aware of the other views, and I'm going to be as fair as I possibly can to other views. But what I don't want to do is disappear down philosophical little rabbit holes or up little bunny trails and things, and then not get some of the big picture. In a sense, I think that's better left to the book, because I really do dig in great inane detail in some places, down up, particularly on scientific themes that as a scientist I was very, very interested in. So I dig into some entanglement and quantum thoughts and 5 numbers, the Rees books about the 5 different constants of the universe that all happen to be they have to be the values that they are as a group, which is an amazing. It was an amazing. For somebody who's a scientist and a cosmologist, that's amazing that the universe, all these constants have to be those values as a group. And you then say, well, how did that happen by accident? And you think, well, actually, there's a multiverse, and the multiverse generates an infinite plurality of universes, which, and then therefore one must have life. It's they're very interesting questions, and but they are sort of very sort of like narrow. In some ways, those are sort of like a broad, they try and explain everything, but then you have the problem when you start explaining everything, you don't really explain anything. So we've got to try and capture a balance between not being trivial or constructing straw men about the issues that we're doing. The concept of a straw man is where you misrepresent, you present your opponent's argument in the weakest possible way, and that which then makes it really, really easy for you to criticise and to destroy those arguments. So we don't want to do that. We want to sort of like to be. That's the way politicians do things. If you've ever, if you're watching the, I'm a very strong, avid US watcher. In fact, I know more about probably the US than I do about the in and outs of my own country, to be honest. But if you're watching the US presidential election at the moment, there's straw men all over the place, straw men and women and any number of 150 different genders. So, we'll probably have to say straw something. We'll have to come up with a more gender neutral term. But that's by the by. So I'm trying to make these sort of like bite size as well, but enough that you can really dig in and to a subject and trying to encourage you, right? I'm going to read, because in a sense I was trying to introduce a view of philosophy, and I'm trying to do it honestly and in the book. Oh, the sun's come out. The micro little subject that I want to look at today, and I'm not pretending that this is a comprehensive or even adequate in any other way other than to try and grab somebody's interest, because it's such a presentation. I'm not trying to say this is all there is to this, but what I do want to try and do is say enough about it that somebody will say, that is worth reading about more. And I've got a couple of little books that I will plug as great basic introductory treatments, and they go a long way. They're not just basic, but they're introductory, they're fundamental in the sense, they're good treatments of the subject. So what I wanted to talk about was what you might call skepticism, because in some way, skepticism is sort of like us all over our culture, and in many ways we've become very, very skeptical as a race, as human beings. But skepticism is multifaceted, and it needs to be understood. Not as you can't just use the word skeptical and then think that, and then come up with a single definition. It's not. It's very much a situational word, and you normally want to sort of qualify it in some way. So when we talk about skepticism, really skepticism comes in two real flavours. There's something you might call local skepticism, or methodological skepticism, and then you have what global skepticism. Now, global skepticism is as it suggests when you talk, it's a much stronger form of skepticism. It wants to say we cannot know anything at all, and so that the final conclusion of the global skeptic is that we can't know anything at all, and that goes all the way back to ancient Greece. The sort of like the what you might call let me try and pronounce this right, Pyrrhonian or Pyrrhonian or skepticism, which is sort of like which was a strengthened form of what was academic skepticism, which actually was from Plato's academy. Plato founded the academy in Athens, and his successors within say 200 or 300 years had become completely skeptical to the conclusion that you can't really know anything, and or that their skepticism was taken to the next degree, where by Pyrrho, which is why it's called Pyrrhonian skepticism, which strengthened it even more. And so that sort of global skepticism, I mean, it's interesting because in the mitigated form, that's not like the academic form, was in a sense it was sort of like trying to say, well, what you really need to do is you need to, because they were criticising the Stoic view of knowledge, and the distinction between impressions and how you build up some sort of, how you receive knowledge about the world external to you. And really the global skeptic really wants to be, when I look at it, sort of like zoom out, the global skeptic wants to say, are there any instances in which you can doubt your senses, or you can demonstrate concretely and absolutely that the information you got from your senses or from analysis or from was wrong? And so your answer is yes, there are. And so the global skeptic wants to make the logical leap to say, therefore, you can't know anything about anything because all your judgments you might make about the world are falsifiable, or they're skeptical, or falsifiable, or they're not going to be true. You can't guarantee the truth of them. So the skeptic wants to say, this is just a general, the world, in a sense, it's like a metaphysical form of skepticism. So it's absolutely saying this is the way the world is, or this is the way we relate to the world, that we can't know. The world is elusive to the human mind. So it made a big comeback, because in the sense the Enlightenment period was very much trying to say the opposite. It was saying that the mind of man, the early moderns were very much into saying that the mind of man can understand the world. We can come to use a posh big word, apodictic truths about reality, which basically means that your mind can really come to the truth. Moritz Schlick sort of at the end of it, a glorious sort of like it's called a glorious like book about knowledge, and then right very, very close to the end, because he wants to refute the Kantian view, and so he wants to sort of like connect us. They wanted to present a more scientific view, the logical positivists, and so he sort of like right at the end is glorious argument, and he comes to the end and he sort of like says, he just says, but apodictic truths about reality are beyond the reach of the human mind, which sort of like was it was like a desperate surrender to just say, yeah, the game's up. We can't really know reality the way reality is. He almost reverts to the Kantian. It's almost like a collapse back into the Kantian view, and some people did actually say that and said, aren't you just collapsing back into the Kantian view that of the noumena being unknowable beyond human cognition? Aren't you just sort of like collapsing back into that in there? Now there are conceptual differences as to what he's actually saying, because most of the logical positivists wanted to be scientific. They wanted to champion something called induction, and induction is where you go from specifics to the general. So you take sort of like specific measurements, and then you sort of try to come up with some sort of you're saying, right, this is some sort of pattern here, and therefore it's the basis of physical science. Now most of the physical sciences are founded on the inductive principle. So you're saying, right, I'm looking at phenomena in the world, I'm doing some measurements, I'm coming up with some sort of hypothesis about it, or some sort of theory. You're building up the hypothesis with some sort of theoretical work perhaps, and then you're sort of doing experiments to try and verify your theory, and then you're provisionally at the end of it you're saying, the more evidence you get, the stronger your inductive generalization that's coming is going to be. So induction's a fascinating subject, because the problem of induction is something in a sense that's tormented the philosophy and science, and not just the philosophy of science. It's sort of like it's tormented philosophers, because there's very much a logical weakness there. It's a bit like the I will just give a quick example of this, because this is something I'm sure I will do something that just concentrates on the philosophy of science and on the problem of induction. But with the problem of induction, very easy. It's sort of like the Christmas turkey problem. Just imagine that you come into the world as a Christmas turkey. It's January, and you hear this bell, and you go and get your food. You realise, every time. So whenever you hear this bell, it's food time. So bring you food, and so you go in, and that's your universe, your spatial temporal perception of the world runs by the law of the bell. So the law of the bell is the inductive generalization, and so that happens for 11 months, and then suddenly on 1st of December the bell goes, you run, and then some nasty farm worker puts a hatchet around your neck and chops your head off. So what that's meant to try and show you is that just because something's regular, and just because you think something's a law, there's no logical necessity that you cannot prove any law about nature from using induction. There's a logical weakness there, and that's caused a lot of problems to the various philosophers of science. That's why in the 20th century you had the logical positivists, and then they got Quine sort of really dug at them, and there's been other philosophers who have tried to conceive of science in a different way and say that science is deductive instead of inductive, to try and get around this problem of induction and the logical weakness of it. And it's very interesting, because in science you tend to get, and in philosophy and in science you tend to, people tend to, when there's a really big problem, and there's a very much a fundamental problem about knowledge, which is why I ended up doing a PhD on epistemology, because there's a very interesting sort of, when you try and come up with a definition of the various definitions of knowledge, there's an enormous problem. There's something called what's called the justified true belief, and that is if you pushed most philosophers on give me a definition of knowledge, most of them would say justified true belief, and belief, there's no problem. Most people would believe, wouldn't have a problem with belief. They would just say, belief. In order to know something, you would think that at least to know something is like a superset of believing. You have to believe something to know something. Now, there was one dissenter from that view, so we can't even get past that with the first one. Wittgenstein wouldn't. He actually he made the distinction. He said that believing something and knowing something are two completely separate things. But to be honest, I can't find, there's not much support for that view. That doesn't mean it wrong. It just means that not many people have been attracted to he considered them two completely different psychological states. So, but most people would say, right, to know something is at least a superset of belief. And knowledge, again, it should be true to say it's true. It is trying to say it actually corresponds in some way with the real world, and so, but you have issues of how you define truth. But really, under this model, true is really it's a correspondence view of truth. So it's saying that it corresponds with the world in some way. So you can't have knowledge. You can't have that's the interesting question. Somebody will say, can you have false knowledge? Now, that's where your ambiguity in the use of the word knowledge, because people do say, a lot of the time in normal language, normal use of language, you might say, somebody's got a false knowledge of that. But what you're really saying there is you're saying that somebody's believing something that is not true. So that is more of a linguistic issue, and a lot of philosophical problems. Really, this is one thing we can thank Wittgenstein for, and for the logical positivists to make this very, very clear, that a lot of philosophical problems come back to confusions of language, and one of the challenges for the philosophers to try and state what they're trying to articulate clearly. One of the big challenges of, at least in the Western tradition and within the analytical tradition, that's almost one of your operational. That's one of your operational rules, in the sense you're trying to say, I'm trying to state whatever I'm stating clearly. Now, in the continental tradition, or which is a broad brush to say that, but in the various forms of postmodernism that I suppose that have come out of the continental tradition, stating something clearly is just thought of as completely impossible. One of Lyotard's famous conclusions at the end of his the state of knowledge that he wrote is interesting enough for the Quebec in the early, I think it's 1979. I think it was put into English in 1970. But when he wrote it, it was like a report on knowledge for the Quebec government. And when you read it, it's an experience to read it. But one of the things the points he sort of like makes at the end is that he says that he's almost saying that the philosophical process comes after what's actually has already happened, and you're just trying to make evident what's around language, which is this amorphous, imprecise, confusing, and some would even push the deconstructions, push it further, and say any attempt to articulate something in nature, and by nature you mean the physical universe as well as internal states. You're in some views, because we've always got this problem of how we define things is a function of where your philosophical position is. So I'm trying to acknowledge that there's an interdependence on our definitions with our philosophy. So words have different meanings depending on the theoretical context in which they're in. There's no absolute meaning of particular words or particular terms, and that's a very important philosophical principle, and that's something we can thank Wittgenstein for as well, because he said that the meaning of a language is in its use, and its use is often indexed to a community. So each community can have a particular understanding. So even though we might all be in this country speaking English, or English is our first language, at least historically for the nation, we have to understand that other communities who maybe have learned English as a second language use English in a different way, which is very interesting. So what they actually mean when they're speaking about certain things is means something very different. If you like, the conceptualization and the semantics of what they're actually saying are very different. So that's something which is really, all those are very, very important things which, this whole enormous big swathe of skepticism and of a global, the two, so they just to try and bring me back, we talk global skepticism denies that we can know anything about anything, and in the ancient world it was associated in some with Pyrrhonic skin, but also with it's interesting with Protagoras as well. I think it's where we get the word protagonist from. But Protagoras had what he called like a relativistic sort of view of truth, where he said some things are. Would always say, well, some things might be. I might think something's hot. You might think something's cold. Therefore, there cannot be. In the sense, truth is always something that's subjective and individual to you. There's some things which are true for me, some things which are true for you, and therefore there is no truth. And so that is very, very popular in our present culture. But it's astonishingly easy to. It's so ignorant of basic, but it's a linguistic confusion, because what it really should say is that some things seem true for me, some things seem true for you, but there's only one truth. Truth, by definition, is objective and not indexed to person. It's not subjective by definition. If you want to push for a definition of truth, and of course, truth and the pursuit of truth and what truth means is one of the great, as historically anyway, has been one of the great questions of philosophy. But that's how, in a sense, the analytical tradition tries to clean up philosophy, because it wants to say, well, you're saying some things are true for you, you're saying some things are true for me, but really that's just what you feel, and that's your own subjective thing. That's not really to do with truth. Truth, by definition, are the things that are true for everyone. So you might want to say, as a good example there, you might talk about, say, some of the physical laws of physics. It's a bit like, some people can, there used to be a song that says, I believe I can fly, I believe I can touch the sky, but, well, sort of go to the top of the building, jump off, and then, unfortunately, the laws of physics you will encounter the ground in a matter of seconds before you pass into another state of existence, because you may feel something so strongly. Your feelings may dominate it's like your reality, when you listen to an Evanescence song and they're screaming and saying your reality, and so your reality might be so real to you, what you feel, what you think your reality is. But really, that's the thing, you see. But reality is the same for. Reality is not person dependent, and so that just shows you how language can cause an enormous confusion. And so part of what we're going to be trying to do is to try and be clear about our terms and define our terms. Then things become much more clearly. But it's interesting, so in a sense you've got that global sceptical universe which tries to deny that we can really be certain about anything, and that's sort of come down through history, and that's it, in postmodernism today, and deconstructionism and post-structuralism, and you've got all these, in many ways they end up being very, very sceptical and saying that you can't really know anything, you can't be certain of anything, and if you're saying that you're certain of anything, then you're being like a philosophical tyrant. You're being, when the Marxist bent on that is saying that you're in a position of power and that you're oppressing someone else, and when you're taking up these big meta narratives of truth and saying what things are true, that's just because you've got some sort of vested power interest in that, which also goes all the way back to the ancient. It's not a new term. People tend to think of that as sort of in Marxist terms, but that was way back in the ancient Greek world as well, where I'm not sure if it was Parmenides or one of the I'm pretty sure, I don't think it was a pre-Socratic, I think it was after Socrates, but where he actually says that justice and righteousness and truth are just what those people in power decide they are, which is why in one sense it was called the cynical view as well, is because it just says that all the trappings of civilization and society and culture, they're just all controlled by the most powerful and influential people in society, which have the money, and of course, as in a sense, will be picked up many 2 millennia later in probably 2.5 millennia later in Marxism, which tries to divide, in neo-Marxism anyway, classical Marxism divides people up on economic grounds and said that the predominant relations of our society must be viewed in economic relations, whereas a neo-Marxist in a sense, or critical theorists would say it's not just economic, it's gender, it's race, there's all these different power relations, and so there's not really any such thing as truth or some sort of way of some sort of coherence within the overall philosophical project. You just have to get along the best you can based on your understanding, and so that's the catastrophic mess that results from, say, some sort of global sceptical view that you can't be certain about anything. And so I do write. I just did a quick scan of the introductory chapter of the thesis, and it was very much said, I stand implacably opposed to this view through this work of the global sceptical view, or if you like, that's what you would call a metaphysical sceptical view. You're just saying that the way reality is constituted is we just don't know. We're just going to have to get along the best we can, and so. But there is another form of skepticism, which you might call local skepticism or methodological skepticism, which is far more. Now this is far more useful, and it helps you to escape from being, say, trapped in dogma, and dogma is just what other people have concluded. So, in a sense, most scientists will be skeptical in this sense, is that you would have, say, a theory of, atomic theory is a great I would say a great sort of like paradigm case of this, of understanding how in a sense skepticism is not necessarily something that's terrible or bad, because the perhaps when you talk about global skepticism, you're talking about what the scandal of skepticism. Somebody, Plantinga, called it the scandal of skepticism, because you come to this global skeptical conclusion about the way the world really is, and that you can't really know anything about the world, but you've used the same faculties of perception and thinking. You've got to a conclusion by using your processes of reason. So you're trying to say about your global skeptical conclusion that this is the way the world really is, but your conclusion is saying that the faculties and the methods and the principles that you use to get to that skeptical conclusion, you can't trust them. And so the obvious sort of comeback to the global skeptic is, well, why should I believe that? I can just, on your own basis, on your own terms, you seem to be, I can just refute you. And that's what you call being incoherent, is that if you follow the assumptions or the conclusions back, you're refuting yourself. There's some sort of circularity in your reasoning, or there's a critical weakness there. You're trying to conclude we can't know anything. And they say, well, how can I know that if we can't know anything, how can I know that we can't know anything? You see the problem there? And so that's why, in the sense, I would say I'm up front, I'm saying I'm totally opposed to that view of global skepticism. And there's also what's called the inductive fallacy in that, in where you say that the problem, that turkey problem, that the turkey, the Christmas turkey problem, is trying to say that just because you can't move with any sort of logical necessity or logical certainty through induction, so you can't generalize from the particular to the universal. So it's a very destructive negative view. So whereas when you talk about local skepticism or methodological skepticism, this is very much where you're saying, well, people have told us this, and this is how it works. Say we had the plum pudding model of the atom or something, yeah, and I think it was Thomson's plum pudding model of the atom, and so he'd done some experiments, and he just came up with this. He tried to come up with this sort of hypothetical model, and then and so when people were testing, what would be the what would be, say, if he's correct, let's design some experiments. And one of the experiments which was used was they shot helium nuclei, so like at the atom, and they said that if he's right, if Thomson's right, then what's going to happen is, because you've got the sea of negative charge and distributed in this amorphous pattern. And so really what we should suddenly see loads of helium, because the helium nuclei are going to be, the electrons are going to attach onto the helium, and you're going to see, and you would not expect any of the nuclei to travel straight through this cloud. You just generate helium. But what they actually found was that something like 99% or something of the helium nuclei went straight through and came out the other side, and just hit the detector. And so they're saying, well, and but they found that very occasionally what would happen was that one would shoot right back again. It would almost be a very bleak angle. It would come right back at the person. I've got to be a bit careful. I've got to work this afternoon, so I've got to keep my eye on the time here. And I thought that little buzzing phone there was me saying, "Oh, put a reminder." But what they concluded was that there must be, the atom must be a concentrated piece of positive charge right in the centre, something solid right in the centre, and 99% must be empty space, the electron. And so that's where you get like the classical sort of like view of what most people think, and even in popular culture now, when you look at the atom and you've just got like a nucleus in the centre, positively charged, and you've got all these electrons that are supposed to be like planets spinning around sort of like the middle. So that was showed that people were, that's in a sense a skeptical methodological way of working, where you're sort of saying, well, if this is the case, then this should be the case. It's not the case, therefore we're gonna doubt this for methodological purposes. A lot of science in that way, or when you're trying to progress an idea, you're moving from, you're just trying to get evidence for a particular, you might have, especially when you're working in science, you're doing this all the time, or when you're trying to understand the problem or formulate, you're coming up with something and you're saying, right, this is what our theory at the moment tells us is going to happen. Let's try and design some experiments that confirm that theory. But if it doesn't confirm that theory, then we're saying, well, there's something inadequate about our theory. And so it's not destructive. You still believe that you're trying to move towards, you still believe that truth is a legitimate target of your investigations. And that's the critical distinction, I think. So when skepticism tries to use fallibility in our perceptions, or as an excuse to deny the truth that anything is possible, then that's a global skepticism, and that is just an intellectual cop-out, and it's cowardly, and it's morally cowardly. People use that because people often use that. This is one thing I want, which I try to bring out through my book, is that your metaphysics, your epistemology, and your ethics are all strongly interwoven with each other. We divide them up because, for the purposes of analysis and for understanding them, and some people might call themselves ethicists, and some people might call themselves epistemologists, and some people might call themselves metaphysicians, but the three are only separable for analysis purposes when we're actually involved in the living and the doing of life, and in our philosophy, what is our philosophy of life. They're intimately tied up together, and so many people who want to deny that, say, there's any certainty about the world, or we can't really know anything, the crude form of that philosophy is eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And you think that's not really a philosophical statement. Yeah, it is. It's got a massive metaphysical assumption there, a materialist assumption that there's nothing. That's it. Life is the meaning of life is to live it now and to indulge it now. So you're immediately dispensing with an afterlife. Eat, drink and be merry. Well, you're actually saying eating and drinking are the most to satisfy yourself physically is the most important principle of life. And you don't realise how much, so you're adopting a particular ethical outlook to the world. So your metaphysics, your epistemology, and your ethics are all strongly tied up together. So that's trying to give the flavour of the different forms of skepticism. So because skepticism, and the problem with skepticism, is one of those themes within philosophy, which is which is there, and people often don't realise how important it is, and how destructive skepticism can be. But on the other hand, how important skepticism is, or to adopt a sceptical view, of actually progressing towards a non-skeptical conclusion. You're doubting everything. I mean, this is one of the great things regarding, the René Descartes in the 16th century is generally recognised as being the first of the modern philosophers, because what he did was he brought epistemology, which is the knowledge and how you know things, into the centre of the philosophical enterprise by his sceptical argument, his argument from doubt. Because what he actually said was he said he started with himself, in the sense, rather than, say, starting from some sort of metaphysical premise, which scholasticism, or in a sense the metaphysics of the Catholic Church, and they started with existence as sort of like being primary, with an essay with being primary. Whereas Descartes said, well, what can I doubt? And he said, well, I can doubt, it seems I can doubt everything, but except that I'm thinking. Because he said, he used his evil demon hypothesis and said, well, because an evil demon could be deceiving about everything else in the world, but if he could, he would deceive me that I don't even exist. So he said, no, that's so my own existence and my own awareness that there's thinking going on. That's his famous cogito. I think, or I am thinking, therefore I am. And so that was his base. So his fundamental assumption, his starting point, was himself and his awareness of himself. So it was an epistemological starting point. It wasn't like a theological starting point, a metaphysical starting point. And that's why he's called the start of modern philosophy, because he brought into the centre of the philosophical enterprise epistemology and how we construct knowledge. And so, but his method was skeptical, but he didn't want it to be a skeptical conclusion. And he came up with various understandings and arguments about he believed that he thoroughly confounded skepticism in that global sense. Now, virtually nobody that followed him believed that he did finally do that, but in some ways people miss out, I believe, as a fundamental, very, very basic misunderstanding of Descartes, which even Bertrand Russell was guilty of when he talks about, if you consider Descartes, I'm thinking, therefore I am, as a logical syllogism, which is like an if-then sort of construction. It goes back to Aristotle. If something is true, then this is true, and that's called a syllogistic logic. Is that if you consider I am thinking, therefore I am, it's circular, because you've already assuming the I in your logical construction. So what you're trying to prove, you're already assuming in your argument. Whereas being more charitable to Descartes, because Descartes recognised because the reason why I reject that characterisation of Descartes, that even lots of philosophers have propagated out, all the way down to sort of like Russell and I'm sure others, when people criticise Descartes, they often say that there's an error in his basic fundamental reasoning, because he's assuming what he's trying to prove in the syllogism. He's assuming the I before he's trying to prove the I, but he's already assuming the I. When he said I'm thinking, therefore I am, he's already assuming the I. But Descartes himself recognised that and actually said that if I'm making the cogito in a syllogistic fashion, he was saying the premise, I'm assuming the major premise and he said that's not what I'm saying. He was an intuitionist in that sense. He was just saying so he didn't consider it like in a syllogistic fashion. He actually whatever this I was, it's like a placeholder there. He's just saying, I'm thinking, therefore I am. And so he's considering it sort of like in an intuitionist fashion. And later, some people have looked at that and even said, well, we would probably more likely to call that, he's considering it as like as a statement, a transcendental. He's making a transcendental statement. So Descartes, but the point being, there's lots of interesting philosophy there, which is probably why I've gone on about it. But what's so important is that skepticism in itself is not when you're using a methodological doubting, understanding that there's a process of knowledge, that we're sort of like at little bit steps, we might not be at the truth now, there's a process that you're actually going through, is something very different than saying we can't be certain about anything and therefore we can do anything. You see how the epistemology, which you have, I can't be certain about anything, therefore I'm going to live this way. That's an ethical position. So you see, you've bounced already from your metaphysics to your epistemology to your ethics. And so that's going to be one of the themes I'm going to be bringing out again and again, which is why I'm so much interested in Christian philosophy, is because you cannot separate your metaphysics from your epistemology, from your ethics, if you want to be coherent. If you don't want to refute yourself, because remember the key point was there, if you're saying a global skeptical conclusion, you're using faculties and facilities to get to that global skeptical conclusion that your global skeptical conclusion says are not reliable. So why on earth should I, somebody's perfectly liberty to say, why on earth should I believe that we can't know anything? Because if we can't know anything, I can't know anything. How can I know that I don't know anything if I can't know? You see, that's what's called a self-refuting or an incoherent argument. So the reason why, in a sense, in the series, I'm just looking at the clock because I've got to start work in 15 minutes. End of my holiday. So if right at that point, if we don't understand that our view must always be non-skeptical in the healthy sense, and so that's why I say at the beginning of the thesis I'm opposed to the skeptical view, but what I'm really there. But then I make clearly I'm clear later on that I'm opposed to the global skeptical view, because skepticism in science and in all sorts of it's just how you progress it. You're saying that maybe something might be provisionally correct, and the problem of that obviously invites the problem especially when you're dealing with ethics and Christian ethics, or any sort of, if you consider ethics to be like a science, you're going to say, well, any ethical conclusions that I might come to are just provisional. And so you do find this in the ethical literature. You do find people that are saying, well, you can, the sort of like the idea of core ethical principles, which is, you would obviously think Christian ethics or any type of ethics really, or you would say they're all vulnerable to this sort of like idea of, well, you come to conclusions at a certain point, but you might have extra information or extra data or something that comes that then changes your conclusion. So there's lots of interesting topics and subjects and studies that, they'll all be coming sort of like into work. There'll all be some sort of discussion here, because I believe this fundamental interconnectedness of your metaphysics, your epistemology and your ethics, this, if you like, worldview, we can wrap that term, conceptual scheme or worldview. Now again, you have to be distinguished between the two, but as a first point, to say conceptual scheme or worldview is it's how that is your philosophy of life. You can't avoid having a philosophy of life. Okay, well, I've just got 14 minutes and I'm going to have to start work. Friday's always a busy day for me, so even when I'm on holiday I still have to not be on holiday, so because we do a lot of publishing on Friday afternoon, and so I have to go and take care of that and probably have something to eat beforehand. Okay, so again, I'm probably going to chop this up because I can see I've got 43 minutes and I probably have the first one when I got dazzled by the sun there. I think there was a few minutes before that as well. So the probability is this is big meal for somebody that wants to look at the whole thing, but I'm sure I'll be chopping up little ideas where I was trying to bring something out about skepticism. So I was just trying to bring up that term skepticism. Now, as a little plug, something I believe would be helpful. I'm not related to this person. I've got nothing to do with it. But this little book here, it's called Knowledge, and it's by Jennifer Nagel, and it's great. It's one of these very short introductions, and so but it packs in to 125 pages. It packs in an enormous amount that really helps. It gives a great coverage of skepticism and the different sort of theories of knowledge and its relation to truth, which will be some of the themes that I'll be digging into as I go through the series. I would strongly recommend getting these. I think these are only about £7, and you can probably, which I don't know what that would be like in dollars, $7-8 or something, perhaps I would imagine. But you can get them secondhand on Amazon. They're really. It's a great little investment. It's nothing to do with Christianity. It's not a Christian book. It's just an exploration of knowledge. And I will say, if you can get this one as well, this is a much older book, but it's called The Web of Belief, and it's by William Van Orlen Quine and J.S. Ullian. I will put like the ISBN on here. This is a much older book, but this is a great. They originally wrote this as a primer for American English college student coming to do English courses. So they're talking all about, but it proved so popular in philosophy courses and in introductory science, philosophy of science courses, that they did like this second edition where they concentrate more on evidence. But this goes through this sort of like covers sort of like belief, observation, self-evidence, testimony, hypothesis, induction, analogy and intuition, and both. I mean, Quine was a famous naturalist, so this is an interesting. This is like, if you like, what I would say a primer in scientific naturalism, and it really helps. But it delineates and makes it much clearer the limits of the subject and the issues that we're going to be talking about. And it also fundamentally interesting because I when I go through the thesis at some points, because in this book he sort of like admits the problem with induction, and he was saying that we're trying to disprove, because because people who are naturalists sooner or later are always going to have to fall back on some sort of on evolutionary science or some sort of evolutionary account to try and justify basic positions, or like, if you like, the basic metaphysical position. Commitment is to evolution. It's not like a scientific commitment to evolution, it's a metaphysical commitment to evolution. And so it's very interesting, because he says, well, the way you try and get past this riddle of induction, understanding its logical weakness, is say we have to rely on natural selection in some way. But then he said, well, we've got the problem because biological science is founded on most of the science and any other science that we're trying to deal with this problem. They're all defined inductively, and we're trying to use induction to justify them. And so so in a sense he's admitting, there's this enormous circularity and there's this enormous gap in our thinking because we can't get past this problem of induction. And so but it's still a great introductory book to the practice, or if you like, the methodology of how you deal with problems and belief and how you structure things. Because just because your metaphysical foundations might not be right, or in a sense you've got some sort of incoherence in your system, which I think every philosopher is going to have incoherence somewhere, then nobody's going to be able to work out everything in a perfect fashion. You're always going to have some points at which you can't. Your own arguments you're arguing against yourself at some point. But the challenge to be coherent as a philosopher, I think, is one of the the fundamental foundational demands. But just because the coherence breaks down at some point, this is still a great example of methodology and getting you and how, in a sense, the importance of critical thinking and of structuring things. Okay, so I really must go now because I am literally just about to start work, and I'm sure my emails will start bouncing very rapidly as people know that I'm going to be at work. Okay, so God bless, and I will pick up on other themes. And I've sort of like, because I'm so excited and gone into philosophy, I've made this much longer than I originally wanted to. So, but I will definitely be chopping up these little bits. And we're still going to call this one Scepticism, because we've sort of tried to give a big vista of skepticism and make the important distinction between skepticism as methodology and skepticism as a metaphysical commitment. Okay, thank you, bye.